Awesome. So I know we said the numbers are maybe like 25% or 21% of people are new to Ethereum or kind of relatively beginner, but can we get a quick show of hands? Just curious, who is pretty new to Ethereum? What do you say? Don't be shy. Awesome. Great. Awesome. Great to have you all here, and it's a pleasure being here. Fantastic talk, Albert. That was really awesome points. I would love to just go into a little bit more in depth as to kind of where we've come, how crypto can win, and if crypto wins, why did it win? If it loses, why did it lose, and where we're headed, how we're going to get there concretely and efficiently. So so I'm an Ethereum protocol developer, co-founder of Prysmatic Labs. We're working on an Ethereum 2.0 implementation. That basically is going to be a radical upgrade that's going to increase the scalability of the platform, make it more massively, accessible to the public, have it, have a better, more robust security model called proof of stake as well. So this is our team. So most of us are here, and please come find us after. I mean, we'd love to chat, love to tell you about some of the challenges we've encountered and where we're headed. When I actually first started learning and had that magic moment with computers was actually the first week of September, around 6 years ago, just across the street at a little place called Sanders Theater in a class called CS50 here at Harvard, where they showed us this really cool diagram of what the internet is going to look like in the future. They had this really, really awesome kind of perspective of having all these different packets of data coming all across the world, and it just really felt like something that, was just truly decentralized, truly accessible to people who wanted to interface with this network. Coming to the conclusion that over the next few years, I would encounter the internet is very far off from that initial promise that was given to us, and have been since trying to find something that could get us closer to that goal. As such, I discovered Ethereum. And why should we care about Ethereum today? Why is this something that we should build on at the moment? To give a little bit of quick background, I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we are today with respect to surveillance states and kind of how this comes into relevance. I remember in high school checking out 1984 from the library, having it recommended, having it been like this cool little sci-fi thing. It felt really, really, really far off from reality. I'm originally from Honduras, in a country that has very little access to technology, and imagining this sort of, big brother is always watching you sort of thing, imagining the concept of doublethink, having the own citizens really, question the nature of the reality and kind of accept the doctrine and the dogma of this world felt super alien to me in a sense. Main questions going through my head are, how can the people that live in this society ever have allowed this to happen? How did these governments even, coalesce into this shape and form? And what led them to be in this current state? And really the answer to me was extremely unclear. Humans are super multifaceted, organisms. We have so many different incentives and oftentimes irrational perspectives on life. And really, I think one of the oldest and most important human emotions is fear, and really fear of safety, maintaining people safe, perhaps sacrificing something in the name of the common good, and why that matters. So, we've all been familiar with the concept of things like Amazon Go. I mean, it's, we've all used Venmo to some extent, and it's funny to browse through and see what some of the funny things our friends are spending on. But really, what cost does it come? But is this really just a small jest? Is it just something that we should trivially care about? Or does this have a deeper, perhaps a more sinister tone than it seems? The most common argument is, hey, I'm a law-abiding citizen. Why should I care? Or why does this really even matter to me? Is kind of like the serious tone of it more like a slippery slope? Well, today we see so many stores completely going cashless. In fact, people say that if cash were invented today, it would probably be illegal, right? In the future, we're actually going to go cardless. And in the future, you might have your transaction being rejected because you are not really authorized to purchase a book. And this is the sort of reality that kind of gets us closer to that sci-fi perspective, right? And the thing is that, at the end of the day, the people in charge are really doing this to fit some sort of narrative of protecting the common good, protecting the daily average life of a law-abiding citizen. Why should they matter? This is fitting into a common narrative. Problem with this is when institutions decide to sacrifice individual freedoms for a common narrative and for the common good, their definition of this is what truly makes a difference and can be extremely, extremely dangerous. For the first time, and I want to really echo this, is we have the capability of creating, how Albert said, these anonymous yet credible systems that don't depend on human trust as a primitive. In reality, every piece of technology that we build with assumptions. Assumptions, technical assumptions, societal assumptions, philosophical assumptions. One of the biggest ones that we create every time we write a piece of software is that there is some sort of aspect of trust, some sort of anchor that prevents this technology from being kind of misused and has some sort of built-in protections that protects both the end users and the party that created such technology. Right? By default, this sort of property and this assumption is something we can throw out when we build something like Ethereum. And so actually, this slogan was actually not coined by Blockstack. It was actually originally from an old post on a Chris Dixon Twitter thread, where he's essentially echoing the same point. Like instead of just reinforcing the assumption that we should not just push forward that narrative that that we should just not abuse our power, we want to build systems that just cannot have participants abusing their power by default. And I think that's a very powerful concept. So Ethereum's early experiments. When Ethereum was first conceived, it really had no plans of what you can build on it. If some of you recall the old website for Ethereum, it had some really cool examples of like, hey, make a DAO, or like, hey, like, like make an escrow contract, like settle a sports bet with your friend, right? But at the end of the day, like, one of the things that really resounded upon me from reading the old Ethereum website as well is that they mentioned, hey, we have no features, Like Ethereum is an open network. Like we don't care what you build, even if it is a literal pyramid scheme like FOMO 3D, right? And I think that's powerful, right? So of course, technology is a tool. It will be used for good and for evil, but one of the most important things is that it gives us option. And option is something that is being seen as more of a luxury as time goes on and as our society becomes more and more evolved into the surveillance sci-fi nation state. So, we've come a pretty long way, to say the least. The oldest Ethereum wallets would completely sacrifice a lot of UX in the sense of having a very strong sense of security. You would basically be running a fully validating node just to be able to access your accounts and be able to transact with each other. Right? This is super cool. But in reality, not really what most users needed. Essentially now we have applications where you don't even know that you're using a blockchain. So if you look at things like Gods Unchained, which is a fully collectible card game, kind of like Hearthstone, it's, these cards are ERC20 tokens on Ethereum. We now have things like MetaMask Mobile where you can actually open a CDP just from your phone. And I want to give a shout out also to Portis, which is also a really cool platform where you can go on a website, without even knowing, without even having to access or download an extension and immediately log in and be able to start using it. Additionally, today is probably one of the most interesting times because we've had so much progress in things like Tornado Mixer. So these are tools that allow you to actually mix your coins with other participants and further decouple your financial sovereignty from your identity. Aside from that, we have Aztec Protocol, which is doing some really awesome stuff on zero-knowledge proofs, so you can essentially send fully private transactions. Just further, pushing this notion that, like, hey, you're in control here of your funds, and this is what Ethereum allows you to do. And these things are actually live on mainnet, so yeah, please go check them out. We actually now have an incredible set of financial building blocks that we couldn't even have dreamed of a few years ago, right? We have things like, like DAI has been so incredible throughout this whole journey. We have things like Dharma that allow you to just lever. InstaDApp is a single dashboard that allows you to control and see access to all the things that you control in this financial ecosystem. Aside from that, we do have the tools to onboard the next 100,000 developers. Like they're right there, and the technical challenges are real, and there are awesome peers to work with and learn from on this journey. However, let's take a look about how we can tip the scales a little bit further, right? So if crypto wins, how did we get there? And likewise, if it goes the wrong way, then what happened? What led it to be that way, right? I truly believe that for Ethereum to succeed, we must build applications that really enrich and improve the daily user's life through ways that abstract away the blockchain itself. We must provide an essential product, and I really want to highlight essential, that provides something that cannot be done by centralized services. And we want to ride a paradigm that this is an unstoppable, borderless, trustless technology that is a public good for the world. right? When we say public good, it's open to everyone, right? Whether you want to use it for good and evil, that's what matters. Like, there are options out there, and it is, I think it's one of the most critical aspects that we must retain in this society. So it is pretty easy to imagine a world in which Ethereum wins, if that world is crypto native. And that's extremely not the case today. A lot of the things that you can immediately come up with as use cases for blockchain depend on kind of this assumption that everyone is kind of participating in this open network, right? How do you get them involved in this network? How do you even bootstrap and kickstart this, right? Onramp still has a massive roadblock and a massive way to go for adoption, and a massive privacy hurdle to overcome as well. On the flip side, if we lose, then what happened, right? It's a few things. So if we consider the hypothetical scenario in which surveillance states a kind of draconian laws kind of rapidly outpace the rate of innovation in privacy technologies that we see in blockchains such as Ethereum, we can see that as a massive detrimental factor towards a lot of new developers or people coming into the space, right? An interesting thought experiment is to think like, can total criminalization of ownership go crypto? Although this might be going a little bit too far, at that point you're basically forbidding citizens from owning a bunch of numbers, which are your private keys. Can this really, basically destroy kind of this grassroots community, right? And I would argue not. It might have actually the counterintuitive effect. But another thing is if tribalism overtakes crypto. As in any community, there are disagreements, there are own agendas, there are different ideas that people push forward. If we fail to acknowledge our similarities and focus more on our differences, I think this is one thing that can hamper collaboration and prevent us from getting up to speed and kind of going past that hockey stick curve that we see on the previous slides. So, where is Ethereum itself headed? And what is Ethereum 2.0? What does that look like? And this winding road is very much on purpose, right? I mean, we're navigating this idea maze of what's to come. It's, there are a lot more questions that come up. As you ask a question, 10 more pop up, right? So, we have obviously big challenges ahead, right? A lot of great folks here have solved a lot of different scalability challenges around Ethereum using things like layer 2, but at the end of the day, layer 1 still has a fundamental problem of capacity. We burn a lot of extremely unnecessary energy just to power these networks that could be done in other ways. And additionally, we still do not have very satisfactory solutions that make the proper compromises at the layer 1 scale. So to quote my co-founder, scale or die. So basically the idea behind this quote is that we want to get to the point where Ethereum wins, but in reality, if we're not true to ourselves, if this technology does not scale to where it needs to be, then it dies. And I think we have a very strong responsibility to get it there. We have a few ideas here for those who are a little bit unfamiliar with kind of like the scaling strategies towards ETH and ETH1. The basic idea, the most naive solution, I guess, is just to imagine, let's just increase the block gas limit. Let's pack more transactions into blocks, right? This means that each node will require a lot more computational power. And obviously, we just it's one of those things where you're just pushing the problem a little bit further down. You're not really addressing the root cause, right? Makes it obviously less decentralized. Another one is you can reduce the time between blocks, right? I mean, that sounds great. Faster confirmation times. You have all these cool benefits that come along with that. The very big problem is obviously this makes the blockchain more vulnerable to forks and attacks. Blocks have to propagate across the network, and when you have a network like Ethereum that is permissionless, so anyone across the world, there could be somebody in Australia running a node, there can be somebody from here, from this room running a node. You have to understand that these things have to propagate, in real time through the network, understand how that's going to affect the system and the integrity if you do such a strategy. So that's obviously a less secure strategy. The thing we're pursuing in Ethereum is actually this idea called sharding, which is the idea when you take a kind of a data set and you partition it into different pieces, and you can achieve a higher computational throughput by parallelizing this. So, in Ethereum today, we maintain the state. Every single node kind of is a fully validating node. So they maintain the entire state of the chain from Genesis and basically validate every transaction to make sure that they're caught up with the rest of the network and participate in a consensus protocol. In Ethereum 2.0 in particular, nodes are not going to be fully validating nodes. Instead, we're going to be partitioning the state across the network and making it so that the consensus algorithm is clever enough that it's able to reconcile this and be able to securely and efficiently determine the state of the world with a new capacity. To typically we call, this gives you some special type of scaling, and there's a different type of, even crazier scaling called super quadratic sharding, which is a little bit far off kind of sci-fi stuff. So, scalability, really, like, what does it mean? At the end of the day, it's the ability for software to kind of respond in the way it's intended to, no matter at what scale and without fail. And I think that's something that we really need to keep in mind. Next generation blockchains, as you may have heard of, you've probably heard about things like Definity, EOS, and there are a few other ideas out there kind of that, fundamentally redefine a lot of the key aspects of what layer one does and what its responsibilities are in a blockchain ecosystem. In particular, a lot of these sacrifice things such as decentralization for higher throughput. They provide kind of a stronger kind of cryptographic assumption towards consensus. And I think what Ethereum is trying to do and what Ethereum 2.0 really is doing is it's trying to find really the most sensible and the most honest approach to solving this problem. Ethereum 2.0 is trying to maintain a high degree of decentralization, a high degree of security, and also a high degree of speed by being able to just find the compromises between those things, take the best of all different worlds and really learn from each other, put aside the differences between the different chains, and really understand how we can push this forward. So in Ethereum 2.0, we have this thing called proof of stake. And that's going to be a radical change. It's essentially going to change the consensus algorithm. Instead of having to run these really expensive machines that kind of burn a lot of electricity and power just to be able to verify transactions across the network, you're going to be able to just lock up some of your money, some of your ether, earn interest on that, and essentially, basically get penalized if you do something that's provably malicious against the network. This is a fundamentally different security model that's based around penalties rather than rewards, and makes the system a lot more robust against a lot of scenarios. So Ethereum has actually always been, keeping proof of stake in the back of its mind since the beginning, and Ethereum 2.0, we're actually making this a reality. Aside from that, one of the major things that gets talked about a lot is WebAssembly. So many of you have been coding in the Solidity programming language, which is particular to Ethereum and how it started, and it allows you to do some really cool stuff. It's a very nice kind of domain-specific language that's evolved over the years. With WebAssembly, we're taking a lot of cool technologies that allow us to use a lot of different programming languages that we're more familiar with, such as things like Rust and C++, and be able to use them in blockchain programming environments. Granted, not everyone might want to be programming a smart contract in C++, but this gives us a very strong kind of primitive in which we can bring different kind of development communities to really build on this technology in a transformational way. Aside from that, one thing Ethereum 2.0 is going to bring is we're going to have actually the ability to create unbiasable distributed randomness. For those of you that are quite unfamiliar, creating randomness in a blockchain environment is near impossible. It's extremely difficult to do so today. You can do things like use the block hashes as like the randomness as a random seed in your application, but really that's not random. For something to be random, you want it to be unbiasable. You want it to kind of exist independently of manipulation of actors in the system. So we do some really cool stuff around verifiable delay functions, and using this information to create an unbiasable blockchain. So if you're curious about this, please come talk to me afterwards. So with my team, we're building an Ethereum client called Prism. Just like today, when you run an Ethereum node, you run a Go Ethereum node or a parity node to sync up with the chain. When you run the next iteration of Ethereum, we imagine people will be using Prism as their go-to client. This is a way you can actually sync up to the chain, verify blocks, participate as a validator, and kind of do everything you would need to do to interact with the environment of the blockchain. There are currently 8 teams or more implementing Ethereum 2.0 related features or clients. And this is arguably one of the best times for ETH 2.0 and kind of its future. Next week, the teams are gathering in Toronto for an interoperability meeting. That means that they're actually, getting their clients together, communicating via network, and putting together a multi-client testnet. And that's a major milestone akin to some of the first ETH 1.0 testnets that came out there since the beginning. And next month, we're all going to Osaka, Japan, to go to the DevCon 5 conference, which is one of the biggest Ethereum-related conferences in the world. And really crank out more multi-client interoperability features there, and mainnet early 2020. So we're going to be pretty busy out there, but I believe the work will be really worth it. So, if there's any words of advice for those of you that are kind of new to the hackathon, is just really pay little attention to the hype. I think, coming through so many ETHGlobal events, like seeing just how much depth of information and how many motivated people there are to build on these things is what's really exciting. And at the end of the day, like all of you here are tinkerers, you know, and like when we look at new technologies, what we should do is that we should always find those people that are tinkering on the fringes, that are always working on things, keeping their heads down, independently thinking about why this matters over, you know, following something like a hype train. And I think we're at a fantastic moment in Ethereum where, you know, everyone kind of that's in this room truly cares about what this can bring for the world. And I think it's our responsibility to get it there. So yeah, so please check us out at Prysmatic Labs, and thank you so much.